Welcome to part 2 of my creating sushi in Blender tutorial series. If you haven't seen the previous part where we created this piece of the sushi, then definitely check that out with the tutorial playlist in the description. And in this part, we're going to be creating the Mizuki sushi, which is kind of that classic sushi. And just like we created procedural materials for the salmon and the rice, we're also going to be using some procedural materials for the sushi. But we're also going to be using a few free textures from Pixabay, and I'll have a link in the description to the free Pixabay images that we're going to be using. So we'll be using an avocado image and then also a cucumber image. Now, if you like using procedural materials in your projects, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you've purchased and installed my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack, you can just open up the asset browser in any of your projects, and then you can just drag and drop the procedural materials into your 3D scenes to add the materials to your models. You can also check out my procedural material packs, which are just packs of 10 materials, and you can also purchase all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create all of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. The links are all in the description. Alright, so we're gonna start by creating the circular seaweed. So the nigiri sushi, let's click right here on the collection to turn it off, so hit the check mark, and then also the sesame seeds. So let's now right click, we're going to click on new collection, and we'll click on this collection to rename it, and we're going to rename this to the Mizuki sushi. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. So let's go back to the solid view, and to add the seaweed, we're going to go to the add menu, let's go here to mesh, and we're going to add a circle. Now again, I want to model these objects closer to the real life scale, so I want to scale this much smaller. So I'm going to scale this down by a 0.03. So 0.03, hit enter, we'll hit the period on the numpad just to zoom into the object, and we'll press Ctrl A, and we're just gonna apply the scale. All right, so let's go into edit mode, and I'm gonna hit E to extrude, and we'll bring this up on the Z axis, and this is gonna be the circular seaweed on the outside. So let's add some modifiers to this object. So I'll go back to object mode, let's click on add modifier, and we're gonna search for the subdivision surface modifier because I wanna smooth it out, and we're gonna set the levels and viewport up to 4. Now, if that is going to be a bit laggy for your scene, sometimes if you add lots of objects with lots of subsurf modifiers, it can slow down the viewport. So if it does lag your scene, you could turn the levels viewport just down to like a 2 or something. I'm going to leave it up for a 4. And then also it looks like I need to go into edit mode, and I need to select the entire mesh and press Shift N to recalculate the normals. So now that we've added a subsurf, I want to give it more geometry, and then we're going to use a displace modifier to displace it with some noise. So I'm going to press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I'll scroll my mouse wheel until the faces are roughly even, and I'll left click and right click so that the faces stay where they are. All right, so now that we have some squarish faces, we'll go back to object mode, let's click on add modifier, and we want to add the displace modifier, so it's going to displace it and make it look bumpy. Now here on the displace, let's click on new to add a new texture, and I'm actually going to copy this name, the Mizuki sushi, and I'm going to click here on the texture and press Ctrl V to paste that. So that's going to be the Mizuki sushi texture. And I'll actually just call it texture at the very end. So now to actually choose the texture that we want, we're going to click on this button right over here, and this will bring us to the texturing panel. Now, instead of adding in an image or movie, which would be an external image on our computer, we're going to choose clouds, and clouds is going to be like Blender's procedural noise texture. And then we can drag the size and just make it much smaller. And I'm going to make the size 0.01, so it is quite small. Now it's way too strong, so let's click back over here on the modifiers, and right here on the displace, we want to take the strength and we want to turn that way down so it's much more subtle. And now you can see it's starting to look more like bumpy seaweed. But here on the strength, I'm going to turn it way down to a 0.001, so it's very subtle. So now there's just a little bit of bump on the surface. And also make sure you shade this object smooth with the object context menu. So now that we've added the displace, I also want to give it some thickness. So we're going to go to the add modifier right here, and we're going to search for the solidify modifier. So we'll add solidify. You can see right now it's way too thick. So let's just scroll down here, and we're going to make the thickness very small. Now I've found that a thickness value of 0.0005 works pretty good. Why these numbers are so tiny is because we're scaling this closer to the real life scale on Blender, so the objects are very, very small. So just a 0.0005. So if I hit the 5 on the numpad, That's going to go to the orthographic perspective, so I can actually zoom in there, but it should be very thin because seaweed is really quite thin. All right, so I can click on these arrows here just to minimize the modifiers just so they're a bit smaller. So now we can add a procedural seaweed material. So we'll select the object and let's click right over here to go to the shading. I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom into the object. Let's save this again with Control S. I'm going to click on new to add a new material, and we're going to call this seaweed. So this material will be pretty simple. I'm going to go to the add menu, and I first want to give it some noise. So we're going to add a noise texture, and then we already enabled the Node Wrangler add-on earlier in the tutorial series. So with the noise texture selected, I'll press Control T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And let's also hold down the Control and Shift key and select the noise texture to preview it. And to make it more even, I want to use the object coordinates. So we'll put the object into the vector of the mapping. And then let's change some of the settings here. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 3 on the noise so you can see it a bit better. I'm also going to turn the detail to the max of 15. It is a little bit hard to see right now, but you will be able to see it in the bump. And the roughness here, let's turn this to like a 0.55. So now we can put the factor into the normal. So let's drag out the factor and then let go. And we can add a node here. So we're going to search for the bump height, and this will convert it to the bump data. And so the factor is going to the height value, and then the normal can go into the normal. And if I Control Shift and select the principled shader, you can see it now. It looks really bumpy, but it is a bit too strong. So I'm going to turn the strength value of the bump to a 0.15, so it is more subtle. And then also this base color here, I want to make this a really dark color and a bit of a green color so it looks like seaweed. And if you want to use the same exact base color that I'm using, you can click on the color and go to the hex value, and you can punch in 1.3, 1A, 1.3. And then also I want to make it a bit more shiny, so I'll turn the roughness down to like a 0.4. Now I want to allow a little bit of light to go through the object or the material to make it look a bit more like food, make it look a bit more soft. So let's open up the subsurface here, and on the weight, I'll turn this all the way up to 1. So now you can see it looks a bit more like food. It's kind of allowing some light to go through. Now for the radius here, this is going to be the red, green, and blue values of the subsurf. I've found that changing all of these to a 0.2 looks pretty good for the seaweed. So I'm going to change them all to 0.2, and that looks pretty good. So if you kind of look right here, you can see there's a little bit of the light shining through the seaweed, and it looks a little bit green. And that is it for the procedural seaweed material. Let's press Control S to save our project. We can go back here to the layout. So I'm now going to be modeling the rice part, which is on the top of the object. So we'll go to the add menu, and we'll go here to mesh, and let's add a circle. And then again, the circle is really big, so we're going to scale the circle way down, make it really small, and then bring it up on the z-axis. Let's press Control A, and we will apply the scale so that the size of the material actually looks correct. And we'll bring it down here. We're just going to maybe scale up a little bit more. Scale it up like that so that the edge is going right there inside the seaweed. And then because I scale it up again, I just need to press Control A and apply the scale again. So let's go into edit mode, and I need to hit E to extrude and then S to scale. We're going to bring that down a bit, and then I can bring it up on the z-axis so it looks like the rice is kind of popping out just slightly. And then I can hit E to extrude and then S to scale, bring it up on the z-axis again just a little bit, and then E to extrude and S to scale. And then I can press the F key to fill a face there. So now I can select everything, and I need to press Shift N to recalculate the normals. Let's go back to object mode, and then we'll use the object context menu, and we're just going to shade that smooth. And then I want to give this a bit more detail, so we'll just press Control 1. Control 1 will add a subsurf modifier with 1 level, and I want the render and viewport to both just be set to 1. And let's maybe bring the rice up just slightly, so that's pretty good. So now we can add the rice material, but I don't want the rice material to have the displacement. So let's click on the rice. We can go here to the shading, and then let's click on the drop down and we can choose the rice. Now the problem with the displacement is you can see it's jutting out randomly, and that's going to be a problem because we can't actually fit it right there to the very end of where the seaweed is. So we're going to duplicate this rice and make another version of this with no displacement. So let's click on this little file icon here to duplicate the rice material. We can click on it to rename it, and I can rename it to rice no displace. Actually, I'll call it no displacement. So rice no displacement. So now that it's a separate material, it won't mess up the other material. Now, this displacement actually kind of makes it look bumpy. So instead of changing this displacement node, I'm actually just going to open up the side panel here, and we're going to scroll down to the settings. So right down here, the settings, the surface, this displacement and bump, we can change it to bump only. And this way, this scale value, you can see it is going to make it look bumpy. So it is actually affecting the look of the material, but it won't actually pop out the mesh. And so now it looks like we have a little bit of of rice on the surface. Now, because there isn't actually any displacement, it doesn't look quite as bumpy now. So on these bump nodes, I'm going to change them to 0.3 instead of 0.2, just to make them look a little bit more bumpy. So the rice kind of looks like it has more surface bump. And then later on in the video, I do want to put this rice on the bottom so that if you duplicate it and kind of rotate it around, it'll actually look correct on the bottom. But I'm going to be doing that later because we're actually going to cut out some holes where the rice is, and we're going to put the little pieces of the vegetables and the meat. So we're now going to be modeling the avocado and the cucumber and the salmon and the carrot. And we're going to put those inside the sushi. So we'll click back here on the layout, and I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to add a cube. And let's scale the cube way down, make it really small, bring it up on the Z-axis, and then we can press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. So let's first model the avocado. So we'll bring the cube up here, and then we'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to go to the face select, and we're just going to select this face, and I'll hit X to delete, and we're just going to delete the faces because we don't need the face down here. And then if we select everything, we could scale it up on the Z-axis just a little bit. All right, so let's go back to object mode, and we're going to bring this object down here and stick it inside the rice. And then let's press Ctrl 2 to add a subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels, and we'll use the object context menu and just shade it smooth. And then to make it not so round, I'll go back into edit mode, and I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and we're going to drag a loop right up there to kind of sharpen it. Let's also scale the entire thing up on just like the Y-axis so it's a bit longer. And I can also press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I can drag the loop cut over here. And let's kind of scale this up a little bit on the X-axis. Press Ctrl R to add another loop cut, and we can scale this one up a little bit, and I'll maybe add one more loop cut there. All right, so now that we have more geometry, what I can do is press 7 on the numpad to go to top view. I'm going to hold down the Z button and go to wireframe, and then I can click here on the vertex select. So I can now just click and drag to box select some of the vertices, and I'm just going to kind of make these a little bit more of a random shape. So we're just making a little chunk of avocado that we're going to stick inside the sushi, but I don't want it to be like a perfect shape, like perfectly round. So I'm going to make it kind of a random shape. So something like that's pretty good. And also you can see if I zoom in, it's hiding the mesh, it's clipping the mesh. So I'm going to hit the 5 on the numpad to go back into orthographic view. So we'll go to top view again, and I'm going to rotate the object over, and I'm going to kind of rotate over to the side and just kind of stick it right there. So let's now model all of the other pieces. So we'll select the avocado, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, bring it over here, and this piece here is going to be a larger piece of salmon. So we'll go into edit mode, and we'll do the same thing. So I'll hold down the Z button and go to wireframe. And then what I can do is just box select some of the vertices here, and I'm just going to kind of move them around. And I'm doing this in wireframe because I want to select the other vertices which are underneath it, because this is a 3D mesh. So we need to use wireframe to select the parts which are underneath. So we're just going to make kind of a larger piece of salmon, and then we're going to add that same salmon material which we created in the first part of the tutorial. Just kind of giving it a random shape, making it a bit bigger. Let's go back to solid view. That's pretty good, but I might want to maybe bring this out a little bit and then also make the whole thing a little bit smaller. All right, so we'll select this piece again. We'll press Shift D to duplicate it, bring it up here, and we're gonna make a little carrot chunk. So we'll go back into edit mode, and let's rotate this up and then scale it way down here, and maybe rotate it over like this. Go into wireframe, and I wanna select some of the vertices, and we're kind of gonna shape the side around that other piece. Let's make this carrot a little bit smaller. The carrot piece should probably be like the smallest. Just playing around with the shape, making it kind of random, but you can see I'm kind of shaping it to the other pieces. So something like that's pretty good. Maybe even bring it in a little bit. And maybe this piece, we could scale it down a little bit more. Bring this piece in a little bit. And then right here, we're gonna be adding the cucumber piece. So let's now make the cucumber. So again, we'll just duplicate this object. Let's kind of rotate this around, go into edit mode, rotate that. And I'm just gonna model this a bit differently. So this one, if we go into wireframe, we can box select the bottom parts all the way through. So this one is kind of gonna have like a triangle shape, because this is gonna look like a little chunk of cucumber that's been sliced. So right down here, I want it to be kind of coming out more and be a bit more sharp. And then right over here, I want it to be round and kind of circular. So we'll bring this in here, bring this in here. This part here, we can kind of scale it. We can scale it on the X-axis to flatten it down. All right, maybe scale it up on the Y-axis like that, so you can kind of see the shape that we're getting. So we're kind of getting that triangle shape. And also to make this part right here a bit more sharp, if we box select this part, I can press Ctrl B to add a bevel, and I can bring this out and kind of bring it forward. So now you can see it's a bit more sharp there because we have more geometry. Let's scale the whole thing down, and then we can kind of move it in here, and we're just gonna fit it right in there. And let's also select this part here. So select the avocado piece, and let's kind of flatten that down a little bit so that this part here can kind of stick inside there. All right, maybe flatten that avocado a little bit more down. So just kind of fitting all the little pieces, the chunks of vegetables right in there. And then we will be modeling this rice piece around the other vegetables. All right, so we'll now create the materials for these objects. So let's click here to go to the shading, and let's first click on the largest object, and this is going to be the salmon. So if we click on the drop down, we already made the salmon material, so let's add the salmon, but I want to change it just to make it look a little bit different. So I'm going to click on this button here to duplicate the material but keep the same information. And I can make this salmon small piece. So now that this is a separate material, there's just a few things that I want to change. So this wave texture scale right here, I want to turn this up to like a 50 so that you can see more of those waves. I don't want to make it too much smaller, but I do want to make that a bit bigger. And then also if you want to, you can change the rotation Z value and kind of rotate the salmon. So I might just rotate this a little bit. So rotate it so that the salmon is kind of going in the opposite direction. That looks a little bit better. And maybe the scale, I could turn this up to like a 55 or maybe even like a 60. And then if you wanted to, you could turn the displacement scale down, but I think that looks pretty good. All right, so let's now click on the avocado, and we're going to be adding in an avocado texture, and it's a free texture from Pixabay. I'll have the link in the description if you want to download it. So click on the avocado, click on new, and we can just rename the material. And then let's go to the add menu, and we're going to search for image texture. Let's drop the image texture here, and then we'll click on open to open the texture. So here's the free avocado image from Pixabay if you'd like to download it. Link will be in the description. And let's click on open image to open up the avocado. And we're going to put the color into the base color of the shader. And now we need to UV unwrap this. So I'm just going to hit 7 on the numpad for top view. I'm going to go into edit mode and we'll select the entire mesh. And to UV unwrap this, I'll hit the U button and we're just going to click project from view. So now to actually change where that is, you can see right now it's the avocado pit, but I want to click here to go to the UV editing to change the UVs. And now in the UV editor, if you don't see the avocado image, you can click here on the drop down and you can choose the avocado image. And then if I press the period on the numpad to zoom into the object, make sure you have the mesh selected in edit mode. And now you can see that there is the UV editing right here. So I'm going to go up into the rendered view so I can actually see what it looks like. And I'm going to move this over and kind of rotate it. And I'm just going to stick it kind of right here, and I want to be able to see some of that gradient. So you can see on the edges of the avocado is a bit of a darker green, and so I do want to be able to see that. So I might just rotate it and just find a good spot. I actually think I might move it over here because the gradient is a bit bigger, and maybe scale it down. So just find a good spot where you can kind of see that gradient. So now if I go back to object mode, you can see that there is the darker green and then also the lighter green. All right, and that's really it. So we'll go back here to the shading, and now we can make this material look a bit more realistic. So as well as using a principled shader, I want to use a translucent shader. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the translucent BSDF, and let's plug the color of the avocado into both of them. And then I want to mix the translucent and the principled shader together. So to do that, we're going to search for a mix shader, and we'll drop the mix shader here in between the principled and the material output. And then this translucent, I want to put that into the top one, and then this principled shader is going to go into the bottom one. So now we're kind of evenly mixing together the translucent and the principled, and I'm going to leave it at a 0.5 so it's kind of evenly blending them. So that's going to make the material look a bit more smooth and soft. Let's also open up the subsurface here on the principled shader, and I'm going to turn the weight all the way up to 1, and that is going to allow light to go through the avocado, and again, it'll just make it look a bit more like food and make it look a bit more fleshy. And then also, I do want to add just a tiny little bit of surface bump, so we're going to create a quick noise texture and add it to the surface. So we'll go to the add menu, we're going to search for a noise texture. Let's press Ctrl T with the noise texture selected. And again, I want to use the object coordinates so it's placed evenly. And then on the noise texture here, I want to turn the scale up to like a 30. We'll also turn the detail to the max of 15. And I'm going to turn the roughness up to like a 0.6. So now we can plug the factor into the normal, but to convert it to normal data, I need to go to the add menu and I need to search for the bump node, and we'll put the bump node in between the noise and the principled shader. And let's Control Shift and select the mix shader. And then we want the noise texture factor to be going into the height value so it converts it to bump data. Now that is a bit too bumpy now, so I'll turn the strength down to like a 0.2 so it's more subtle. And then this bump normal we can put into the normal of the translucent, and so this way the translucent and the principled are both using that bump. So now it looks a bit more like an avocado. And you can see there's a bit of stretching there on the texture, and that's because we projected it from view, so the texture is flat there, but we are going to be sticking this way down here into the rice, so you won't be able to see it. So that is it for the avocado material. So now let's click on the carrot object, and for the carrot object, we can actually just duplicate the avocado material. So we're going to click on the drop down, we're going to choose the avocado, and then we're going to duplicate it by clicking on this button here, the 2 pieces of paper icon. We're going to duplicate that, and we can call this material carrot. And why I'm duplicating the material is so that we can just kind of change it, but some of the things are already set up. So I want the carrot material to be pretty similar to the avocado, but we're just not going to use the texture. So we'll select the texture, we'll hit the X key to delete it. Also the translucent here, hit the X key to delete it, and the mix shader, we're just going to delete that. And let's Control Shift and select the principled shader. So most of the values I want to keep how they are. However, this weight here, I'm going to turn to like a 0.75, so there's not quite as much of that weight. And then also on the base color here, we need to make this a carrot color. So I'm going to make this kind of like an orangey color and make it a bit darker. And if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using, the base color here is going to be a 75907. That's the exact hex value that I'll be using. And then also this bump strength, let's turn this down to like a 0.1, so it's not quite as bumpy because a carrot should be pretty smooth. And then also right here on the noise, I could turn this scale maybe to just like a 15, so it's a little bit smaller. And I want to make this carrot just a little bit more shiny, so on the roughness here, I'm going to turn the roughness to like a 0.35, so it's a little bit more shiny. All right, and there it is for the carrot chunk. So now let's do the cucumber. So we're going to select the cucumber and we'll click on the drop down, and we're actually going to add the avocado material because most of the things are already set up how I want. So we'll add the avocado, and then we're going to duplicate it to make it a separate material. So we'll click on this button here to duplicate it. I can rename this to cucumber. And then what we want to do is click on the X here to get rid of the avocado texture, and we'll click on open to open a new texture. And then here is the cucumber texture that I'll be downloading from Pixabay. So link will be in the description if you'd like to use it. Let's click on open image. So now what we need to do is UV unwrap this as well. So I'll hit 7 on the numpad for top view. Let's go into edit mode. I'll select the entire mesh and I'll hit U, and we'll click again project from view. So now if I click over here to go to the UV editor, you should see the cucumber, but if for some reason the cucumber texture doesn't show up, you can select it here by clicking on this box here and selecting it. And now I just want to press the A key to select the entire mesh. And if for some reason you can't see the UV editing, you need to make sure you select the entire mesh in the 3D viewport. So for this one, I'm going to scale it down and kind of rotate it over a little bit, and I want to stick it right here on the edge. I also want to box select these vertices here and kind of bring them over because I want that edge there to kind of be able to see the skin of the cucumber, because the cucumber skin is kind of like that dark green. So now if I zoom in here, you can see that that's being at the same spot. So it looks like someone chopped the cucumber in some little pieces. So there's kind of that green spot right there, and then there's the lighter green right there in the center. Now you can see that the avocado is kind of fading away here on the edge, and it's kind of looking more smooth. So to fix this, I'll press Ctrl R, and I can left click and then drag over here, and then left click again, and that's going to kind of sharpen up that edge. So now you can see the skin there of the cucumber more on the side. And so that's it for the UV unwrapping. And if you wait for it to load up, you can kind of see there's those little seeds there in the cucumber. So let's go back over here to the shading workspace so we can see that again. And then for this cucumber, to make it look a little bit more like a cucumber, this roughness here on the noise texture, I'm going to turn this up to like a 0.7. There's a little bit more detail. And then also this cucumber looks way too soft. So on the weight here, I'm going to turn it down to like a 0.5. That's the weight on the subsurface. So it looks a little bit more shiny now. It doesn't look quite as soft. And also this roughness here, I might want to turn this down a little bit to like a 0.4. So it's a little bit more shiny and it looks a little bit more wet. And then also if I go over here to this mix shader, the mix shader is mixing between more translucent or more principled. And here on the factor, I'm going to turn this to like a 0.4. So again, it doesn't look quite as smooth or quite as soft. It just looks a little bit more like it has more water retention because cucumbers have a lot of water. And so it should look a little bit more shiny and a little bit harder than the soft avocado. All right, and that is going to be it for the cucumber material. So let's click back here to go to the layout, and then I'm going to hold down the shift key and select all these objects, and I'm going to bring the objects way down and just kind of stick them right down in there so they're just barely poking up out of the rice. So just like that. Let's go into the rendered mode and see how that's looking. All right, so that is pretty good. We'll press Ctrl S to save. Now to make this look even more realistic, I'm gonna model the rice around the objects. So we'll go back to solid view, and I'm gonna select the rice, and we'll go into edit mode. And I'm gonna hold down the Alt key and just select that loop of vertices there. And I'm gonna double tap the G key, and double tapping the G key will activate the edge slide. And I'm just gonna bring this up bigger. And then what I can do is just hold down the Shift key and select some of these parts and bring them in. And then just individually select some of these, or select a bunch of them. And we're just gonna model this basically around these objects here. So just kind of bring these around. You can also double tap the G key to activate the edge slide. And we're just gonna make all of these go around these objects. So you can do them at once if there's kind of like a nice smooth round spot right here, or bring it in manually, maybe right here, bring that all in there, bring that in. Just manually shape the rice or shape the loop around those objects. Doesn't have to be perfect, but this will add quite a bit more realism. And then what I want to do is press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I'm going to left click and drag in pretty close, and left click again. And we're doing that so that it'll be a little bit more sharp when we extrude it back in. Let's hit the 5 on the numpad to go to the orthographic view so we can zoom in more. And now let's click here to go to the face select, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and Alt select all those faces, and then just hold down the Shift key and select that last face there. So you can see we've selected all of those inner faces. So I'll now hit E to extrude. We're going to bring it down on the Z axis and just bring it down. And we're actually just going to bring it down a little bit, place it there, and then hit E to extrude again and bring it down on the Z axis like that. So if I go back to object mode and just select the seaweed and hide it, you can see what we've done. So we've just extruded that part down. Now in edit mode, we can actually delete these bottom faces. So I'll hit X to delete, and we'll just delete the faces. So I can go back to object mode. I'll press Alt H to unhide that seaweed. Let's go into the rendered mode and just see how that's looking. So you can see it just looks a little bit more realistic, and you probably wouldn't render it this close up, but if I kind of move it far away, you can see there's kind of like a little bit of a shadow there on the edges, and that's because we actually modeled the rice kind of caving in. So that will just add a bit more realism. And then if you want to, you can see if I go to top view, you can see where the part is open. So if I go back to the solid view, I can go back to this object and go into edit mode, and I can go to the vertex select, and I can go to wireframe, and I can just box select some of these faces here, or the vertices, and I can just kind of stick these in here and stick them closer so they can actually come a bit closer because of the subsurface. Maybe bring that in a little bit. So you can see the little chunks of the vegetables and the meat there. It's kind of barely just touching the surface. That looks pretty good. All right, so before we finish this part, I just want to duplicate these pieces and move them down on the bottom. First though, I think I want to select all the little pieces and bring them down just a little bit farther because you can see them a little bit better now. So that's pretty good. All right, so I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select all of these pieces. So just these pieces up here. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, bring it down on the Z axis, and then I can scale the entire pieces. I'll scale them on the Z axis, and to flip them, I'll type -1 and enter. And then we'll bring this up here. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit farther, kind of like that. And then because we flipped it, if I go into edit mode, I need to select everything with the A key. And to recalculate the normals, we can hit Shift N. And it doesn't look like I need to recalculate the normals, but often when you're flipping objects, you usually need to recalculate the normals. I believe if you're in edit mode of the objects and you flip them, that's usually when you have to recalculate the normals because you're actually inverting the mesh or flipping it inside out. So now if I go up into the rendered view, just take a look at that. You can see we have that little piece on the bottom and then right there on the top. So let's press Ctrl S to save, and this is going to wrap it up for this part of the tutorial series. So when the next part is released, it's going to be right up there on the end screen, and I'll also have the link in the description. And if you like using procedural materials in your artwork, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also purchase all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store, and to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material tutorial playlist. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.